Hello, welcome back to How to RV. I am Jason, and what you see here behind me is the lithium, the solar, and all the things that we need to put into our RV. So in the previous couple of videos, we talked about where we're going to try to put this thing and get your input. And we also showed you where we put the charger that's going to charge the lithium battery when hooked up to shore power. So I'll put together a quick drawing or a schematic of some sort, kind of showing what I have back here. But I wanted to take you through all the components and about how they're going to hook up to each other so that if you wish to have a system like this, then you can get all the components and put it together for yourself. Before we get into the video talking about all these components and how they're all going to hook to each other and what they're going to do for my RV, I want to say that today's video is sponsored by Enduro Power batteries. The last couple months I've been working with Enduro Power and trying to figure out what kind of setup that I want for this RV and how I want it to work for me and possibly work for you too. Enduro Power makes all kinds of lithium batteries, and if you're interested in looking at their website, I'll leave the link down below. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and switch the camera angle so that we can show you all the components and how they all work together within this system. So first we'll start with the battery itself, and on the positive side of the terminal here, we're going to run that over to a battery disconnect. The reason for having this disconnect here is because I want to be able to have a system so that I can turn it off so there's no parasitic draw on the system. But just in case you're wondering what parasitic draw is, that means that if the system is not being used, means the camper's not plugged in, it's not turned on, it's not doing anything, that if there's anything in the system at all that requires just a little bit of power, it'll be pulling from the battery all the time, drawing the battery down, and by having the disconnect, I could turn the disconnect off so that it doesn't pull on the battery. Battery's disconnected from everything, it's just kind of sitting there. In order to connect the battery from the battery's positive over to this disconnect, I have to use this cable here, and we're using 2-aught cable in order to run that so that it can handle all the power. Just as a note, this wire right here will be the same size cable that we use on all the connections here and on the negative side, so just keep that in mind. From the battery disconnect, we're going to run from here to here into a 250 amp fuse. The reason for the fuse is to be able to protect all the wiring that's going to be in the system. So if the system starts to have a draw on it and there's a failure in the wire somewhere and the wire starts to get hot, before any of this gets damaged or any of the wire gets damaged, this fuse will blow and protect itself from any further damage. And then from the fuse, we're going to go into a distribution block. All this distribution block is to be able to get the power into it and have several different outputs so that we can connect other things. In this case, you can see one hot wire here, or the red wire, that's going to the solar panels, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Now from the distribution block here goes over to our inverter onto the positive side of the inverter, and then from the inverter goes out to this cable here, which will be plugged into that box, and we'll talk all about that in just a second and how all that works. But that's going to power the RV, or at least that's going to power the RV from the cable outside. Now for the negative side of the battery, it's going to come out using the 2-aught cable that we were talking about earlier into this monitor here. What this is used for is to allow me to be able to monitor my batteries or see the health and the status, how much power is coming out and all that stuff through Bluetooth and this display right here. After the battery monitor, we'll go to the distribution block. It's kind of like the positive side of the distribution block over here, but on the negative side, the negative cable will come in and we'll be able to distribute out the cables going in different places for the negative side of the 12-volt system. And as you can see here, here's the negative side of the 12-volt system going over to the solar panels so that the system can charge itself. We'll get into all that in just a second. And then after that, we'll go from the negative side of the distribution block over to the negative side of the inverter, and then again from the inverter out to the camper. Now for charging the 12-volt side of the RV, on the distribution block themselves will be that charger that we hooked up in the last video. Also will be a couple of other cables going to the solar panels. The solar panels will be on the outside of the RV, and whenever I want to hook up the solar panels, I can just plug them in on the outside, and this cable will run into the distribution blocks and be able to charge the battery from there. So as you can see, the cables are hooked here to the distribution blocks. Cable runs around and goes to the 2 solar panels, and when the solar panels are set up outside, they'll start charging the battery and filling up the battery on the 12-volt side only. Now here's where things get interesting. I want to be able to plug my camper in order to run everything in the RV, like the outlets and all that stuff, so that if I want to make coffee, run a hair dryer, plug up my computer and charge it, anything like that that will require shore power being connected, I'll be able to plug the RV into this system and everything inside of it will run as normal except for the air conditioner. conditioner. I'll explain that in just a second. So in order to do that, I've got a 6 gauge by 3 wire cable, and that 6 gauge 3 wire cable will hook to the back side of the RV, and it'll run over into this box. Inside of this box, I have an outlet that is just like the one that you would see on the post at a campground, and I'll take the cable that came with my RV and plug it into this just like I would with shore power at a campground somewhere. So as a quick recap, I have the battery, and on the positive side, I'll run to a disconnect, to a fuse, to a distribution block, and into the inverter. And then on the negative side, I'll run to the battery monitor and to a distribution block and then into the inverter. And that way the battery can power the 2000 watt inverter, which will send out shore power from this cable into this box that I can plug the RV into. As for charging the battery, I have the converter that we installed on the last video over here that will charge the battery if we're hooked up to shore power. And if we're not hooked up to shore power, we can hook up one or both of these portable Renogy 200 watt solar panels, and those will run through this cable, which will charge the battery if we're off grid. So you can see by the system that we have back here, once we get it installed and everything up and running, we'll be able to charge the 12 volt side, which will run things like my refrigerator, my water heater, and my lights and stuff like that. Everything that runs on a 12 volt system, just like your rig, the things that you can turn on if you're not hooked up to shore power. Now for a quick discussion on why we can't run our air conditioner on this system, but we can run everything else, is because the air conditioner itself pulls so much electricity that it will trip out this inverter. Now, as I said before, I wanted to have a system that I can easily take out of this RV and put into my next one if we ever decide to move into a different one. And because of the amount of storage that I have inside of my RV, I don't want to take up all the room and install something bigger that could possibly run our air conditioner. Now, with that being said, with my RV being a 30 amp RV, I can run just about anything else inside of the RV that I want to, which means I'll have enough shore power to run either the microwave by itself, or I'll be able to run the coffee maker by itself, or any of those other items that pull the most power. If you'd like to hear more about how all that works and why I can only run one at a time, then leave some comments down below and I'll explain in another video in more detail. So until the next time, enjoy your camping trips, keep it safe, and God bless.